Hey guys, and welcome back to the 991 build series. Today I'm giving the FYI on DSC. All right, so DSC is probably one of the lesser known modifications a lot of people do to their car. So I'm gonna do kind of a general overview of what it is, first of all, because I get a lot of questions about this. And then I'm gonna do a drive after we install it just to tell you the difference. Essentially, a DSC controller is a module made by a company that is called DSC. And the best way to think about this module is it's essentially like a tune for your suspension. So if you're familiar with an ECU tune from APR or Cobb or one of these places, you think of that as a way to modify the software within your car to make the engine perform in a different way, whether that's shifting or what kind of fuel it uses or what kind of modifications or upgrades you have or changing power curves. A DSC controller really functions in the same way. So for cars, Porsches in this case, with PASM as an option, there's a lot of sensory elements to that suspension. And essentially the car came with a stock controller. It's located in the rear, behind the rear seats, that is a brain essentially for that. And that controller has a whole bunch of factory tables that control the dynamics of the suspension based on how you're driving. That's not to say that from the factory, that doesn't come in pretty good shape. Just like your engine, obviously, in your 911 comes in pretty good shape from the factory, but there's definitely more you can do with it. And that's what the folks over at DSC have attempted to do with their module. You're basically replacing the factory tables that are built into the software with custom tables that they've written. Think of those as map files if you're thinking about the ECU tune analogy. So this is the controller. This one I happened to pick up secondhand from a fellow driver here in Atlanta. I would recommend considering that, as you can attach this to your car if it's made for your car. In this case, this is for a 991.1 Car S, but is unmarried, so it's been removed from the vehicle it came off of and can now be downloaded and installed to my vehicle. Again, very much like a ECU tune. So essentially this is what you're looking at. So this is the new module that will go inside of the car behind the rear seats and replace the factory module. So honestly, seems at the surface like a pretty simple piece, but the engineering, technology, and research that's gone into this is really pretty remarkable. I would recommend you go check out the DSC controller website for a whole bunch of technical information, but I'm gonna kind of break it down very high level. So essentially what this module is gonna be able to do is a few things. First of all, it's gonna be able to differentiate between low, medium, and high speed change in a rate of travel, which basically means if you're going lower speed, let's say some larger sweepers or something like that in the mountains, it's gonna be able to sense that from the input it's getting from the suspension sensors. If you're going medium speed, maybe that's some twisties up in the mountains versus higher speed, which is city bumps. So again, the speed that you wanna think about is the compression rate of the suspension. So it's measuring through the sensors in the car that come with PASM how quickly and how much the suspension is traveling or changing. That feedback's going into the DSC controller, and then the controller subsequently changing the dynamics of the suspension, and all this happens within milliseconds. Basically, this is tuning from the driver down, right, instead of the tires up. So with traditional suspension modifications, whether that's larger wheels, bigger tires, better tires, lowering springs, coilovers, what have you, all the things you can think of for suspension. That's a really tire up approach, okay? You're taking what's contacting the ground and you're changing those dynamics as it comes back to you as the driver. In this case, it's actually the opposite. So you're taking sensory feedback and inputs from the suspension on the road, but really everything's top down. So it's taking all that in the sort of brain level and pushing it down in the suspension to change on the fly the dynamics of that suspension. It is adaptive, so it's constantly changing based on your data and your feedback. So for instance, for those of you who have a 991, you know that there's a G-force measurement within the car as well. That data is feeding the DSC controller. So as lower G-forces, maybe start to take shape because let's say it starts to rain. You're running the mountains very hard and then rain sets in and all of a sudden the car's sensing lower G-forces, meaning you're taking those turns at a much less aggressive rate. The car will sense that and again, change the suspension while you're driving. So if you think about, like a track example, this is essentially like having an engineer and a pit crew to constantly change your suspension, but it's better because it's on the fly. So instead of saying, hey, well, I'm gonna run some sweepers in this section, I know we just ran a bunch of twisties, let me pull over and change the firmness on my shocks because they're adjustable or things like that. The DSC controller is literally doing this on the fly as it changes and senses things like compression rate, compression travel, and G-forces. So needless to say, very powerful device. Like I said, a lot of research and effort went into this, but the simplest way to think about it again is like an ECU tune, like an engine tune for your suspension. So hopefully that clears that up. I know it's kind of a confusing mod, it's lesser known. I will say the people that I've talked to have said that this is one of the best mods they've ever done, but it's also one of the most subtle mods they've ever done. So it's one of those things where, at least based on the conversations I've had with active users, in addition to what I've looked at online, people will say, I would never want a car without DSC ever again, especially for the amount of bumps and harshness it takes out in the city on one end, and then how dynamic and aggressive it can make your car in the mountains in terms of, you know, oversteer, understeer, coming out of corners, all those kinds of things. But I didn't necessarily know I was missing it either. So again, it's subtle. It's not something like an exhaust where you turn that key and all of a sudden you're like, wow, yeah, I really know where my money went. And you know, yes, I know this thing has an aftermarket exhaust. This one's a bit more subtle. It's really something you'll experience as you drive the car more. But again, everyone I know that has it said, I'd never have a car without it. So we're gonna get it installed. I'll walk you through quickly how that works. It's super simple. And then we're gonna hit the road and I'll share my driving experience, at least first impressions, and let you know what I think. Okay guys, so install. This is, like I said, super easy. So fold your seats down. I think that goes without saying. This carpet piece is basically what you have to lift up. I will say that in this corner back here, this corner's a little tight, so I actually use a screwdriver to kind of get it up off of this section and lift it up. But once you do, you will see the factory controller. So that is this module, and it is just inside a little bit of foam, so you can pull that out, and we're gonna flip it upside down. There you go. So the next thing you're gonna do is just attach these two clips, and we'll use our screwdriver just to give it a little bit of a start. So there's actually a slider you can see here, so you want to slide down this. It catches two little pieces here, but we'll slide this one. It's got a little bit of a lock mechanism basically, so slide that off and that's it. So this is your OEM PASM controller. So we're going to take that out. We will now swap in for the DSC and clip these two in. Just make sure we've got it facing the right direction here. Got one connected and two. Okay, so that's nice and tight. As you can see, got both of those connections. So all you're gonna do from there is flip it back over and put it back in its slot. Push that foam down nice and tight, and then put your carpet down. So yeah, couldn't be honestly more simple, guys, in terms of how to do this. But we'll pop that corner down, get this nice and tight, and then let's go for a drive. Okay guys, so first impressions I would say are very good. So this car definitely feels different. I can say that for sure. The best way I can honestly describe it, to use a phrase that I know my buddy Sean over at Rental 11 is gonna love, would be like buttery smooth. You know, the car just feels different in that before, with the Checkard lowering springs and in say sport mode with the stiff suspension, you know, the car felt bouncy, almost sort of springy, I would say. You know, really every bump kind of made the car almost feel like it's rocking a little bit on axis, and that you're sort of bouncing in and out of things. It's very stiff. With the DSC on, it's really super smoothed out. So it's really more like flat, in that when you're going over all the bumps, the car just kind of stays level and doesn't have kind of that bouncy jerkiness to it, which is nice because obviously you're still getting the sport of the springs and it being lowered and all that, but without honestly the feel, if that makes sense. Now that may throw some people for a loop, to be honest, because I've been driving this for a few minutes before I started recording, and I will tell you that it does take a little getting used to. I'm sort of like, it feels cushy and stock, and I know the car's not stock. You know, the suspension's pretty aggressive with the springs and everything, but it almost sort of tricks you into thinking you don't have suspension modifications on your car, which I guess is the point, which is good. All right guys, so I actually did find a little bit of twisty area here in town, so we're gonna do a quick little test on the DSC. We did the city, now we'll see how it performs on some curves. Oh man, so I can tell you this thing feels night and day. It is planted, it feels like it is stuck to the ground. I mean, it's a 911, so it always feels that way, but with this DSC on, I can tell you it feels like a totally different car. I mean, this thing is super tight, super responsive, very, very little body roll. Wow. Wow. That is pretty epic. So, that was a short little jaunt here in town, but I can tell you that that is night and day. I cannot wait to get this thing to the mountains. Pretty remarkable device, if I have to be honest. The car, especially in the rear, feels just, again, planted. You know, 911s, a lot of the weight is in the rear. That's already an advantage, but it just feels like I can put more down to the rear of the car without the car, I don't know, skipping around a little bit or getting a little jittery, if that makes sense, with the DSC. So, again, first impression, super happy. Honestly, if this thing just canceled out the springiness, call it, and bumpiness, kind of how live the suspension is, typically with lowering springs in the city, which is what I'm doing now, I'd honestly say it would be worth it. If you're getting it secondhand, you know, for that price, it might be worth it just to cancel out the annoyance of being on springs and driving in the city. Add in the obvious benefit you're going to get in the mountains or at the track or any kind of aggressive driving situation, and it's absolutely worth it. I can see why a lot of people say, I don't ever want to have a car without DSC. I think this is something you get really used to in terms of how the car feels, behaves, and handles, where when you drive one that doesn't have one, it's probably pretty stark. It's probably like reverse culture shock, essentially. So super happy. Hope this video was helpful. I don't think there's a lot of them on the driving experience. So I'm gonna do a part 2 of this video up in the mountains because again, I searched and really, I saw a lot of install stuff, saw a lot of overview stuff, didn't see a lot of driver experience. So this is just first impression around town, but so far, very pleased. So stay tuned to the channel. Please hit the subscribe button if you're enjoying the 991 series. You wanna watch more, you want community videos, drive videos, how-tos, DIYs, you name it. So hit the subscribe button if you would. Like this video. Thank you guys very much for watching and stay tuned for the next one.